Chapter 316. This was a taboo for Lin Yun. He hadn't mentioned it all these years, but he always remembered that he should have had a sister. After a long time, Tang Yu felt that Pei Chichi was the compensation. Zhao Ku had killed his mother's child, but God had given Chichi to him. At this moment, Lin Yun felt a little comforted. She lifted her eyes and looked upstairs with a faint smile. After this incident, Tang Jiyuan and Zhao Ku would completely disappear from her life. After the banquet, Tang Yu personally sent Sun Feifei back. He drove the Bugatti Veyron that he always drove, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Sun Feifei sat next to him, a little nervous. After all, this was their first date. She pressed her fingers against her skirt, afraid that he would think she wasn't dignified. For a long time, Tang Yu didn't say a word, so Sun Feifei said softly, "Let's go up and have a cup of coffee later. It's getting late." Tang Yu smiled. Next time. She was a little disappointed, but she didn't dare say anything. The Sun family's teachings were, to be obedient. Especially for a man like Tang Yu, she didn't need family teachings. She would be obedient in front of him. Such a man could make women soften too easily. His coldness was also extremely charming. Sun Feifei was a little flattered. She still couldn't believe that the lucky one was her. She nodded and sat down even more obediently. Tang Yu looked ahead, and his mood was as cold as the night. There was nothing good about Sun Feifei. There was nothing that he liked, but there was nothing bad about her either. Perhaps, this was called making do. As long as it wasn't that person, the little guy who was as beautiful as an oil painting and looked fierce at times, then it could be considered making do. The woman looked at his expression. She was shy at first, but then she couldn't smile anymore. She almost wanted to cry. Because Tang Yu's eyes were getting colder and colder. This wasn't love, and it couldn't even be considered liking. When the car stopped, she asked softly, "Tang Yu, do you hate me?" His slender fingers were still on the steering wheel, and his gaze was deep as he looked ahead. "No. But you don't like me either, right?" Sun Feifei's voice became smaller. His gaze finally landed on her face and he smiled. "I'll try my best." If it was an ordinary man, the girl would have turned around and walked away after hearing such words. Those with a bad temper would have slapped her in the face. But this person was Tang Yu. Sun Feifei was flattered when he said that. At least, Sun Feifei was a little touched. She sat there for a long time, feeling reluctant to leave. Tang Yu, on the other hand, was still sitting upright. He didn't ask her to leave, but his expression was indifferent. Finally, she felt that it was inappropriate to continue sitting like this, so she moved. Then, "Good night." Tang Yu nodded. The servants of the Sun family came to pick up their little princess. Sun Feifei stood there like a lady. She waited for Tang Yu's car to drive away before she walked into the main residence. Tang Yu sat in the car, looked at the rearview mirror, and pursed his thin lips. He really didn't hate Sun Feifei, but liking her should be very difficult. She was no different from the ladies he had met in the past. She wouldn't make his heart move. She wasn't like that cruel little thing. Thinking of that cruel little thing, Tang Yu stepped on the accelerator, and the white sports car shot out like an arrow. He didn't go back to the rose garden. Instead, he drove to Xia City and sat in the car. Chapter 317. The moment Pei Chichi arrived at the office, everyone looked at her with a strange gaze. She glanced at Xiao Wen, walked into her office, and sat down. "Is there anything special this morning?" "No." Xiao Wen shook her head with a strange expression on her face. "Really?" Pei Chichi coughed softly. "Xiao Wen, you look like you didn't get any red packets." Xiao Wen touched her face. "Did I? I'm very happy today, very happy." Pei Chichi smiled. "It's almost the new year. The company's welfare and other things should be almost ready. Are there any problems with the financial side?" Xiao Wen nodded. "There's no problem. The company's situation has been quite good recently. Boss Pei, everyone is willing to believe in you now. Moreover, ever since Ju Mylin went to jail, no shareholders wanted to withdraw their shares. That's for now. They have a mouthful of meat to eat." Pei Chichi wasn't that optimistic. Xiao Wen knew it in her heart and didn't say anything else. Pei Chichi flipped through today's newspaper and asked curiously, "Where's today's financial section?" "Ah, there's nothing." Xiao Wen leaned over to help search. "There's nothing. I might have missed it. I'll look for it later." Pei Chichi didn't say anything else. As the new year was approaching, there weren't many things to do. She got off work at 3 in the afternoon. She drove to a flower shop to buy a bouquet of daisies. When she came out, she saw a newspaper stand. Pei Chichi stood for a while and finally walked over. She picked up a newspaper and paid for it. She returned to the car with the flowers and the newspaper. After putting down the things, she flipped through the financial section of the newspaper. Then, her expression froze. It was a headline of Shengyuan Academy. Tang Yu and a young girl were hugging and dancing. The girl was very beautiful and looked like she had been brought up well. The photo was very clear. Tang Yu's eyes were focused on the girl with his fingers on her waist. Pei Chichi just looked at it and smiled bitterly. He said that he would go on a blind date. She had experienced this kind of method before. It was a kind of declaration, a kind of recognition. Slowly closing the newspaper, Pei Chichi closed his eyes and calmed down for a long time. When they arrived at the cemetery, it was almost dusk. The sky darkened early, and they could already see a hint of twilight. The new grave and the untrodden road made it look even more desolate. Pei Chichi slowly knelt down and gently placed the daisy in front of the grave. She sat on the cold cement and looked at Pei Ming's smiling face in the photo. She softly said, "Dad, I'm here." The face was still smiling, but it could no longer respond to her. Pei Chichi's fingers slowly brushed away the dust on his face. She murmured, "Dad, it's almost New Year. Is your place quiet? Do you blame me for sending Auntie to prison? But if Auntie doesn't go to jail, Jinrong is innocent." Pei Chichi closed her eyes. "Dad, I don't dare to see you. I'm afraid you'll be angry." She rested her head on the tombstone. It seemed like she was much closer to him. "In the end, I didn't have happiness. Her Tang Yu had broken up. He would marry another woman." Pei Chichi didn't say anything. She just held the tombstone and cried. Chapter 318. But now, no one could hug her like this anymore. No matter how painful it was all her. She could only bear it alone. "Dad, I will take care of the Pei Corporation and our home." Pei Chichi sat and looked at the dusk. The cemetery was a little creepy in the evening, but she was not afraid at all because Pei Ming was there. With her dad here, Chichi was not afraid. "Dad, I miss you. If you were here, I wouldn't feel so bad, I wouldn't feel like crying all the time, and I wouldn't be sleepless every night." She had never understood why her dad could not forget Zhao Ku. Now she knew that if she liked someone and loved someone, it would be unforgettable for the rest of her life. She didn't go home until the sky turned dark. She opened the windows when she drove, but it was still very cold. The lights were just turned on, casting a shadow on the winter night. She and Tang Yu had walked that brightly lit road countless times, but it was especially quiet today. It would be New Year's Eve in a few days, and there were children setting off small fireworks in the residential area. Pei Chichi looked at them all the way, and for some reason, her eyes felt a little warm. She heard Tang Yu's voice. "Pei Chichi, if you get pregnant, we will get married. Pei Chichi, let's have more children. Pei Chichi, when we have children, you will be the elder, and she will be the younger. They will all be babies." For the first time, she regretted it. If she got pregnant back then, would she be able to stay by his side no matter what happened? Would she not want him to leave, no matter how hard it was? The white Shimai stopped slowly, and Pei Chichi opened the door and got out. She stood on the street in the middle of winter, watching those children set off fireworks. She was a little envious, because Pei Chichi didn't have a home now. It was almost New Year's Eve, and she had no one to celebrate with her, no one to stay up late with her, no one to have a reunion dinner with her, no one to hug her and say, "Our Chichi is 1 year older." She stood there, watching those children, and didn't feel cold at all. A child saw her and ran over. "Sister, do you want to play with us?" Just as she finished speaking, she asked cautiously, "Why is big sister crying?" "No, the wind is too strong." Pei Chichi smiled. She took a small firework from the little girl's hand and lit it up. When the fireworks were lit, in the midst of the flames, she saw warmth and hope. It was as though she had returned to the past. It was just like when she was young. She always felt that she wouldn't get beaten up tomorrow and that her auntie would like her. She would be like Pei Huan, a little princess. Pei Chichi's eyes curved slightly as she smiled faintly. The little girl ran over and took another stick and lit it with her. Pei Chichi didn't notice a black limousine slowly passing by. At this time, the car slowed down and the window rolled down. Tang Yu and Sun Feifei were sitting inside. Sun Feifei was the one who opened the window. She sounded a little excited. Tang Yu, look, there are so many children setting off fireworks. Should we go down and take a look? There was a banquet that night, and Tang Yu and Sun Feifei went together. There was still time, so it was okay to satisfy a little girl's wish. However, when the window rolled down, not only Tang Yu, but Sun Feifei also wanted to bite their own tongues. Because Pei Chichi was there too. Chapter 319. She stood there, wearing a white coat, which was particularly eye-catching. It was so eye-catching that Sun Feifei wanted to close the car window, but she did not dare to. Tang Yu also saw it. He was a little shocked, and then he saw her car parked by the side. When the car slowly drove past, he saw Pei Chichi's smiling face. Her eyes were curved, and her smile was very sweet. She was as happy as a little girl. His face became a little cold. It seemed that she was living a good life. Sun Feifei saw that his expression was strange. When she was about to close the car window, Pei Chichi turned her head around. In an instant, they looked into each other's eyes. In such a strong night wind, her white dress and black hair made her look so beautiful that she could be eternally beautiful when she turned around. The car slowly drove past, and the driver in the front was already driving at the slowest speed, just like a slow-motion scene in a movie. Tang Yu's eyes were locked on her, and Pei Chichi could not move her eyes away. She saw him and the beautiful woman beside him. At that moment, Pei Chichi felt that the world was empty, and something was disappearing from her body. She saw Sun Feifei whispering something in his ear, and then the car window slowly closed. What she was facing was just a layer of black glass. She stood there blankly until she felt a sharp pain in her hand. The fireworks hurt her fingers, leaving a few black marks, and it was burning hot. She reflexively threw away the fireworks in her hand, but her eyes were still fixed on the car in the distance. She said to herself, Pei Chichi, from now on, he belongs to someone else. He will no longer hug you, call you baby, and treat the wound on your hand because you are the most important person. Pei Chichi, you have completely lost him, lost Tang Yu. Her hand was still in great pain, but she did not care about it. She just stood in the cold winter night, looking at the lights in the distance. Her hand was still in great pain, but she did not care. She just stood in the cold winter night and looked at the bright lights in the distance. A few children were in the distance, and the little girl said softly, "Why is the sister crying?" A few children were in the distance. The little girl's voice was soft. "Why is that big sister crying?" Crying? Was she crying? Pei Chichi raised her hand and wiped her face, only to feel a burning pain in her palm. He opened his palm and saw the wound on it. She was stunned for a moment and looked at him silently for a while before walking to her car. He gripped the steering wheel and felt a sharp pain in his palm. He could no longer drive the car. She could only get out of the car, take out her bag, and hail a taxi. After waiting for a long time for her to speak, the driver coughed softly. "Miss, where are we going?" Pei Chichi looked at her palm. "Let's go to the hospital, the nearest hospital." The driver drove to the nearest Eastern hospital and arrived in less than 20 minutes. Pei Chichi took the money from her wallet with one hand and thanked him in a low voice. At this time, the hospital had already closed for the day, and there were only emergency cases. She registered a number and waited in the corridor. There were about a dozen patients in front of her, all of whom had colds, headaches, and fever. There were elderly people and young couples, all of whom were snuggling up to each other, especially a few young couples, who were particularly affectionate. On the other hand, Pei Chichi seemed especially lonely when she stood by herself. A young man glanced at her, which made his girlfriend pinch him hard. The young man said something to make his girlfriend happy again. Chapter 320. After waiting for about half an hour, It was finally her turn. The doctor checked her hand and asked with his sensitive nose, "Did you play with fireworks?" She replied, "Yes. These days, there are always children brought here by their parents. They are all injured from playing with fireworks. One even hurt his eye. But you are the first adult." The doctor said with a straight face, "Luckily it's your left hand. Otherwise, you won't be able to take care of yourself." Pei Chichi couldn't help but ask, "It's just a small injury. Why can't you take care of yourself? You need to use your hand to eat and go to the toilet, right?" The doctor did not continue. "So you should be glad. Prescribe some medicine and apply it for a week. Don't touch water for a week. It'll be troublesome if it gets infected." Before Pei Chichi could say anything, the doctor flashed his white teeth again. "Then you need an injection and an 4 drip. I heard that young girls are afraid of that. Damn it." She had to accept the doctor's threat just to see a doctor. Pei Chichi took the prescription and didn't leave. The doctor laughed. He knew this young girl. Actually, he didn't really know her. He had heard that the girlfriend of the president of Shengyuan was especially afraid of injections. Every time she got an injection, Mr. Tang would carry her as if she was his daughter. And photos of Pei Chichi and Tang Yu were often published in the newspapers. So, he recognized her immediately. Now, the young girl's face changed after being scared. The doctor thought to himself. Pei Chichi took the ointment and the nurse cleaned her wound. She was afraid of pain, but she endured it and did not make a sound. No matter how painful it was, you had to endure it. No one would hug you and comfort you. Pei Chichi, don't miss the past. Don't miss the warmth brought by Tang Yu. That will make you weak. She didn't leave after applying the medicine. She saw a pair of white-haired old people supporting each other. The old woman was receiving an 4 drip. Perhaps she was afraid of pain. The old man was coaxing her. "Suing, don't be afraid. It's just a little pain. If it really hurts, you can bite me and it won't hurt anymore." The old woman blushed. "Old thing, don't be impatient. Aren't you afraid that the nurse will laugh at you?" The nurse pursed her lips and smiled at the side. The old granny spoke again. "Daughter, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me, but this old man has been like this all his life. Whenever I have a minor illness or pain, he will be extremely nervous. It's not like I'm a little girl anymore, yet he's still so affectionate. Even I feel embarrassed for him." Perhaps because it was rare to see such a loving couple, the nurse softened and said softly, "That's your blessing, Grandma. See, I'm the one who treats you the best in this world. If you had followed your first love, I wouldn't have treated you like this." The more he talked, the further he went. Chapter 321. On the other side, it was 7:30. Tang Yu sat in the car without much of an expression on his face. Sun Feifei occasionally stole glances at him. She only felt that Tang Yu's expression became colder from the moment he saw Pei Chichi. Previously, it was just a little indifferent, but now it was indifferent. Moreover, the coldness that was emitted from his body almost froze her. It was only the second day, and Sun Feifei had already begun to have doubts when she saw Pei Chichi once. Tang Yu had chosen her, but she couldn't even be considered a substitute. She was so careful when interacting with him that she didn't even dare to speak. And he treated her politely, but he was distant. However, when he saw Pei Chichi, she clearly saw a touch of fanaticism in his eyes. Sun Feifei sounded as if she was about to cry. "Tang Yu, do you want to stop the car?" Tang Yu interrupted her. The driver stopped the car abruptly. Tang Yu looked ahead and said, "Sun Feia, I think I should apologize. My name is Sun Feifei." She really wanted to give him a slap. He actually couldn't even remember her name. "Okay, I'm sorry." He finally looked at her. "I'll give you a concert. It'll be held in the Sound Nest, and there will be 5,000 people." He said this very calmly, and Sun Feifei immediately realized it. Is this considered compensation? No, it's a deal. He looked at her. The premise is that we still pretend to be together. Sun Feifei was stunned. Why? Tang Yu smiled faintly, but there was a hint of bitterness in that smile. I don't know. Maybe, when I see her, I can't help it. Will you be with her? Perhaps it was because they were no longer lovers. Sun Feifei felt that it was much easier to talk to him, and she was also much bolder. Tang Yu gave her a warning look, and she suddenly felt that she had said too much. However, unexpectedly, he still answered her question. I won't. Sun Feifei thought to herself. What he said was not what he meant. The mouth says no, but the body is honest. Send Miss Sun back, Tang Yu said to the driver and opened the door to get out. Sun Feifei held his arm. Can I make a small request? She looked at him expectantly. Tang Yu's gaze fell on her face. Can you kiss me? Just a kiss on my forehead, she said in a low voice, very carefully. Tang Yu pursed his lips. No. As he spoke, he closed the door. Sun Feifei widened her eyes and looked at the closed door. She was about to go crazy. She had just been dumped by him, and he wouldn't even let her kiss him on the forehead. It served him right that no one wanted such a cold man. It served him right that he ran away from his marriage. It served him right to suffer. Sun Feifei kicked the car door and felt much better. The driver swallowed his saliva. God, it turned out that women were just as violent. Once the man left, they would reveal their true colors. However, after a while, he heard a loud wail coming from the back. Damn Tang Yu, why didn't he want me? What's so bad about me? I'm pretty, I come from a good family, I can play the piano, and, even if I'm not good at anything else, I'm very obedient. Why didn't he want me? Bastard, he can't get a wife in his life. He can only wait for Pei Chichi for the rest of his life. Sun Feifei tore at the tissue paper. Tang Yu's car was completely ruined. When he got out of the car, he realized that he did not have his wallet with him. Even his cell phone was in the car. Looking at the long road, his face tensed up and he quickly walked in the direction where Pei Chichi had gone. He did not know what he wanted to do. He just wanted to see her now. If he just wanted to see her, his heart might die. About 15 minutes later, he saw Pei Chichi's car. But she was not there. Tang Yu frowned and looked at the car. Chapter 322. Tang Yu replied calmly. The little girl was very innocent. She tilted her head and said, My sister cried just now, and her hand seems to be injured. Injured? Tang Yu pursed his thin lips. Also, she forgot to lock her car. The little girl stuck out her tongue and said, Uncle, if you know my sister, can you drive her car away? It won't be good if it gets stolen. Tang Yu looked back at the car, then at the little girl and waved her over. The little girl came over and he reached out to ruffle her hair. Chichi, go home early. Uncle, my name is not Chichi. The little girl pouted. She was unhappy. Tang Yu smiled and said, Then can Uncle say sorry? The little girl stared at him for a while. Her friends called her from afar, so she skipped away again. Tang Yu turned around and opened the door of the white Chimay. Sure enough, it opened easily. He sat in the car and smelled a familiar scent. It was Pei Chichi's scent. There were a few CDs in the car, and he saw a newspaper. He couldn't be more familiar with the photo on the top. It was taken when he and Sun Feifei were dancing together. He didn't know who had captured the angle so accurately, but his eyes looked especially affectionate. Did she misunderstand? Was that why she cried? Tang Yu's face became colder. He started the car and drove quickly to Shia City. When he arrived at Shia City, he went upstairs and opened the door. The room was dark. The tightness in his body suddenly relaxed. He had forgotten that she didn't live here for a long time. Pei Chichi had moved away. Tang Yu turned on the lights and saw that the inside was much quieter than before. He walked in slowly. He pulled off his bow tie and threw it aside. His body sank into the sofa. He closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. Pei Chichi, if I could forget you, I would never choose to see you again. He closed his eyes and rested for a while. Then he picked up the landline and dialed Pei Chichi's number. But she turned off her phone. Tang Yu's expression was even worse. After putting down the phone, she walked out and drove her car around. In the end, he saw her in a small park not far from Shia City. It was late at night, and she was sitting alone on a bench in the park. Isn't it cold? Aren't you afraid of danger? Tang Yu parked the car on the side of the road and got out. When she raised her eyes to look at him, There was a momentary shock on her face. He walked straight up to her, not saying a word, just looking down at her. She raised her head and looked at him. After staring at each other for what felt like an eternity, he finally bent down slightly so that his face was level with hers. They were very, very close, so close that his lips were almost touching hers, so close that it seemed like they were kissing. Pei Chichi's heartbeat quickened. She wanted to retreat, but he held her back with one hand. She believed that if she dared to move, he would kiss her lips. Her breath was in a mess. She didn't dare to look up, afraid that she would drown in his black eyes. Slowly, he said, "Why are you crying?" As he spoke, his thin lips moved back and forth on her lips like a soft brush. She didn't dare to move an inch. This was too dangerous. "No," she answered too quickly, almost shrilly. But her eyes were closed, and her eyelashes couldn't help but tremble. She looked extremely fragile. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes, and the large palm on her back moved to the back of her head. Pei Chichi immediately opened her eyes. She realized what he wanted to do. But his movements were too fast. Before she could resist, their lips touched, and he kissed her. On this cold winter night, in the deserted park. Chapter 323. The night was very cold, but his lips were very hot, as though they were going to burn her. Pei Chichi instinctively tried to push him away, but how could she move him with her weak strength? He had originally used one hand to press her down, but now he used two hands to hold her cheeks. He kissed her deeply, and Pei Chichi felt a little uncomfortable. She clenched her fists and tried to punch him, but she couldn't stop him. He quickly caught her disobedient hand, folded it behind her back, and held it with his other hand. In this way, she was presented to him in an embarrassing position. Tang Yu panted and let go of her little mouth. He lifted his handsome face slightly and saw that her breathing was also erratic. "Why are you crying?" he asked once again. Pei Chichi raised her head and didn't say a word. "Do you want me to kiss you again?" His tone was a little mocking. She finally said, "I'm not crying. Even if I'm crying, it has nothing to do with Mr. Tang." "Is that so?" He stared at her eyes, suddenly got up and left. Pei Chichi heaved a sigh of relief. Then she felt a kind of emptiness and loneliness, an indescribable feeling. But Tang Yu came back very quickly, and when she looked up, she saw her car. "He drove her car here? Are you sure you didn't hurt your hand because you saw this?" He was still cold. He didn't give her any warmth because she was crying or because her hand was hurt. Nor did his heart soften because of a kiss. He placed the newspaper in front of her. As Pei Chichi read it, her heart slowly calmed down. She looked up at him and pursed her lips. Then she said lightly, "I went to see my dad today, Tang Yu. I only cried because I missed him, not because of anything else. As for this newspaper, it was just a coincidence." He stared at her eyes, not letting go of any changes in her expression. Pei Chichi's face remained indifferent, not letting him see through her. Slowly, his expression became even colder. He straightened his body and looked around. "I'll send you back." His gaze fell on her bandaged palm. It must have been burned by the fireworks. Pei Chichi's hand shrank back, and she instinctively refused. "No, I'll go back myself. And then you might be raped by a tramp in this place, and I'll be the last person to see you, and then I won't be able to clear my name," he said, quite pitilessly. Pei Chichi pursed her lips tightly. In the end, she got up and walked with him to her car. She did not ask him why he was driving her car. She did not ask him why he was looking for her, because if he asked, everything would go back to square one. She was not flattering herself, but she knew him very well. For some reason, Pei Chichi felt sad for him. Originally, she felt helpless, but now, she felt that Tang Yu was hurt even more than she was. She put her fingers on the door handle and said softly, "Tang Yu, don't come looking for me anymore. You think too highly of yourself, Miss Pei." Tang Yu's face was a little tense. "I'm just doing a good deed every day." She did not argue with him, but quietly opened the door and got into the car. On the way, they did not speak. "Your address," he suddenly said. Pei Chichi looked up abruptly. She stared at the headlights in front of her and whispered the address. Tang Yu did not speak. The car drove so fast, that her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Mr. Tang, slow down. Her voice was a little hoarse. Tang Yu pursed his lips and slowed down the car, but he still said mockingly, I thought you would want to get rid of me as soon as possible. She cleverly did not reply. Chapter 324. The car stopped, but he didn't move. She didn't dare to move either. Thank you for sending me back. She lowered her eyes. Tang Yu's fingers were still on the steering wheel. He was silent for a long time before he said, Can you still drive with one hand? Huh. Pei Chichi was a little surprised. Tang Yu's voice was still cold. I'm hungry. I haven't eaten yet. After saying that, the atmosphere in the car became a little strange. Pei Chichi tilted her head and looked at him for a long time before she nodded. She opened the door and got out of the car. Tang Yu followed her. This was a moderately old building. She lived on the 6th floor. After getting out of the elevator, she held the key for a long time but couldn't take it out. Finally, Tang Yu opened the door for her. The house was very clean, like the place she lived in. Tang Yu looked around and asked her lightly, Where's the bathroom? In the inner room of the room. She was supposed to bring him there, but thinking about their current relationship, it wasn't suitable for them to stay in the same room. Moreover, he had a girlfriend. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. If you want to use it, it's easy to find it. I'll go downstairs. He watched her walk to the kitchen before he slowly walked to her room. Just as he thought, the bedroom was clean and tidy. It was the way she liked it. There was a pillow on the bed, just like the one in Shia City. He looked in Pei Chichi's direction and suddenly walked over. He picked up the pillow, opened the pillowcase and sniffed it. He smelled a faint scent of cologne. It was the brand he usually used. In other words, this pillow had been used by him, and Pei Chichi had taken it away. She didn't take anything but a pillow, and it was his. How could he believe that she didn't love or like him at all? Tang Yu narrowed his eyes and put down the pillow without batting an eyelid. Then, he went to the bathroom to relieve himself. After washing his hands, he walked straight into the kitchen and watched her down there. It's not convenient for my hands, so I can only make it simple, she said softly, not looking at him. She probably heard his footsteps and knew that he was there. She made a simple egg noodle soup. Now that it was almost ready, she turned off the fire and filled a bowl. Let me carry them. Tang Yu reached out and placed the 2 bowls on the small dining table. Naturally, this place couldn't be compared to the rose garden he lived in. It was the difference between heaven and earth compared to Shia City. But it was clean and tidy, and it had a different kind of warmth. Pei Chichi sat down and glanced at Tang Yu before lowering her head to eat her noodles. Tears welled up in her eyes. She had never imagined that one day, she would be able to have a meal with Tang Yu. Moreover, she made it herself. Tang Yu ate very quickly. He was probably really hungry. When he put down his chopsticks, Pei Chichi looked up and asked, Do you need me to make another bowl for you? No need. You probably can't finish it, he said as he took a part of her bowl for himself. Pei Chichi was stunned for a moment. It was understandable in the past, but their current relationship was obviously not suitable anymore. She wanted to say something, but Tang Yu had already lowered his head to eat. He could even eat simple noodles with elegance. Pei Chichi lowered her head and took small bites of the noodles. Then she keenly sensed that his eyes were on her after he finished eating. Chapter 325. It's inconvenient, isn't it? He looked at her deeply. I don't have a cell phone, and I don't have any money with me. You want me to walk back? Her heart was beating a little fast. I have change here. She wanted to get up, but he held her down. His eyes were locked on her. Do you want me to leave so badly? Pei Chichi was a little stunned. She looked at him and was speechless. Her hand was still held by him. After a long while, he suddenly said, It's snowing outside. I'll stay here for the night and leave tomorrow. She uttered a weak no. Don't worry, I won't do anything to you. He said indifferently, I have something important to do tomorrow morning. Also, Miss Pei, you seem to have forgotten that I have a girlfriend. Pei Chichi really wanted to scold him. If your sense of morality is so strong, Then why do you still want to eat the noodles I cooked? It's not the noodles. Some children will think too much just because of the sentence, let me eat the noodles tonight. Actually, the author really didn't mean it that way. It's just the noodles. But since he said that, she couldn't reject him. It seemed that she had something to hide if she rejected him. Her small red lips moved. There's a small guest room here. You can make do with it for the night. Tang Yu smiled faintly, looking very dignified. But after a while, Pei Chichi regretted it. She was used to living alone, so she didn't lock the door when she washed her body in the bathroom. Tang Yu took a clean towel into the bathroom, while Pei Chichi was outside the bathroom. Her pajamas were half taken off, and she was wiping herself with the towel. She looked so much more seductive than not wearing any clothes. Tang Yu was only wearing a shirt and trousers. He looked at her quietly for a while before he started to unbutton his shirt. Pei Chichi covered her body with her hands, and her voice was a little shaky. Tang Yu, what are you doing? Taking a shower, he said very naturally, his voice cold and hoarse. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. Get out. Tang Yu looked at her and went out. However, when he reached the bedroom, he quickly took off his clothes and threw them on her bed one by one, especially the black bullet top. When he opened the bathroom door again, Pei Chichi was about to cry. Did he know what this meant? They were separated. How could this be? She could not care less about cleaning herself. She covered her body with one hand and squeezed herself out of the room. However, Pei Chichi was still too naive. She sat on the bed, waiting for him to leave her bedroom. Tang Yu came out after showering for 10 minutes. When he came out, he only had a small towel wrapped around his waist. It was so small, it looked like it was going to fall off. It couldn't cover anything at all. She lowered her face and pretended not to see it, but her face was a little hot. Just now, when she saw his long and slender legs, her entire body felt weak, as if something had broken out of a cocoon. Tang Yu looked at her indifferently. Do you have a hairdryer? She suddenly looked up and saw his back. Her bedroom was really too small, and it seemed a little cramped for him to be here. His presence was too strong, as if he was everywhere. Moreover, he was only wrapped in a small towel. I'll get it. She got off the bed carefully, walked to a small cabinet, and squatted down to get it. Chapter 326. Pei Chichi accidentally bumped into the area where he was wrapped in the towel. What was even more unfortunate was that the towel had loosened. The atmosphere seemed to have frozen. Pei Chichi raised her little face and looked at him with a pitiful expression. Tang Yu's eyes were deep and bottomless as he looked down at her. He pinched her chin and moved to the side so that she wouldn't see him in such a sorry state. You can't wait to throw yourself into my arms. He took the hairdryer from her hand, calmly bent down to pick up the towel, wrapped it around his body, and casually dried his hair. Pei Chichi stood there and didn't even know that her feet were numb. Just now when she saw him, she was excited. She shook her head and didn't dare to think about it anymore. She was afraid that if she continued to think about it, she wouldn't be able to control herself and would throw herself at him. Tang Yu quickly finished drying his hair, put down his things, and walked out. After he left, Pei Chichi couldn't fall asleep. Her hand didn't hurt too much, but, with him around, she always felt uneasy. Sometimes when she closed her eyes, she would suddenly wake up when she felt sleepy. She would always feel that someone had suddenly entered the room. After staying up like this for half the night, she finally couldn't sleep anymore. She quietly got up and wanted to go to the balcony outside to see how the snow was falling. She had just opened the door to the room when she was choked by the smoke outside. She instinctively wanted to retreat to her bedroom, to return to that safe little world, but her waist was quickly grabbed by someone, and then she was pressed against the door, firmly pressed. He had a burning masculine scent on his body, and it affected her domineeringly. Tang Yu. Her voice was extremely weak, and her body struggled slightly. However, her weak strength was no different from a kitten in front of him. Instead, he suppressed her even more forcefully. She could only look at him helplessly. Her watery eyes seemed to be soaked in a layer of water in the dark. Don't call me Mr. Tang anymore. He bent down to look at her, and before she could react, he kissed her little mouth. She awkwardly turned away, but he held her little head with one hand and held her in place. Mixed with the scent of tobacco and masculinity, he invaded her domineeringly. As the kiss deepened, his large palm moved downwards without hesitation. "Don't!" Pei Chichi let out a broken voice. She pushed him with her injured hand. Even though it was very painful, she still pushed him. She could not have sex with him again. Tang Yu stopped abruptly, his deep eyes staring at her. "You don't want it." His large palms were teasing her cruelly, and his dark eyes were cold as he watched her struggle, pain, and despair from the torture. Pei Chichi's forehead was dripping with sweat. Her head drooped to one side, desperately trying not to make a weak sound. "Even so, you don't want it." He approached her, a small flame burning in his eyes, enough to ignite her. "No, no, no." She shook her head desperately, almost crying. She had known about love affairs for a long time. This kind of thing, or it could be said that once Yu Wang's gate was opened, it would be difficult to close it again. It was fine if he was alone, but now that he was teasing her like this, she couldn't take it at all. She almost went limp on his palm, and she was in a sorry state. Tang Yu leaned close to her ear, and his voice was low and hoarse. "Is that so? Then what is this?" Pei Chichi closed her eyes immediately, refusing to look. "You don't dare to look. You don't dare to admit that you want me." He bit her little ear, grabbed her hand, and tortured her even more. Chapter 327. Pei Chichi finally burst into tears. With one hand hanging around his neck, she moved her lips to his with misty eyes, as though she was begging to kiss him. Tang Yu's dark eyes looked at her quietly, and all his movements stopped. Then, he let go of her and smiled faintly. "Miss Pei, I think you've misunderstood." Her eyes narrowed, but he was still smiling. He said nonchalantly, "I have a girlfriend." He took 2 steps back and admired the way she looked at that moment. Pei Chichi clutched her pajamas tightly to cover her body. She glared at him. "You jerk. Whatever you say." His expression turned a little cold. "Pei Chichi, I've said it before. I won't wait for you in the same place forever." He even said to her a little cruelly, "Fei Fei is more obedient and sensible than you are." As he said that, his dark eyes stared into her eyes, not letting go of any slight change in her. Pei Chichi's body was warm, but her heart was cold. She leaned against the door tightly and stared at him. Slowly, her lips curled into a small smile. "Then I'll have to congratulate you." After saying that, she felt indescribably tired. She loosened her fingers, opened the door, and walked into her bedroom. The door closed. She leaned against the door and closed her eyes. She couldn't help but cry. Tang Yu was too despicable. She sobbed softly. Then, she squatted down and hugged herself with one hand. She had said that she wouldn't cry anymore, but she couldn't help but cry when he treated her like this. Pei Chichi thought that perhaps she should leave this city. She couldn't stand seeing Tang Yu and son Fei Fei after they got married. She would go crazy. She had previously planned to move the Pei Corporation's headquarters away and sell that piece of land. It wasn't a bad thing for the Pei Corporation, and it would give them more liquidity. Although this wasn't what she wanted. Now, she admitted that she was a coward and that she was running away. He was too powerful. She couldn't defend against him. Outside the door, Tang Yu was only wearing a white shirt and trousers. Just now, it was a lie to say that he didn't want her. He wanted her so much that he was crazy, but he wasn't a man who couldn't control his lower body. He wanted her, but before she was honest with him, he would never touch her. He had his pride. Tang Yu pursed his lips tightly and returned to the small guest room. The place was very small, so he made do with lying down for the night. He left early the next morning and used her phone to call Meng Qingcheng. Downstairs, Meng Qingcheng watched as Tang Yu walked down the stairs. He looked around again and thought of Tang Yu's absence last night. He smiled and said, "Don't tell me that son Fei Fei lives here." As he spoke, he handed a cell phone to Tang Yu. "You left it in the car. By the way, I have bad news for you. Your car probably needs a thorough cleaning. I heard from the driver that Miss Sun did a lot of indecent things in the car." "You don't want to know." Scrap the car. Tang Yu opened the car door and got in. It wasn't because Sun Feifei did anything to the car, but because he had sat with Sun Feifei and Pei Chichi had seen it. Meng Qingcheng smiled. That's such a waste. He glanced upstairs again. Actually, he didn't need to think to know who lived here. There was no one else but Pei Chichi. Chapter 328. Meng Qingcheng smiled and said, "You've fallen into her trap." Tang Yu didn't say anything. He just smiled and said, "Let's go back to the rose garden and change." The car turned and went to the rose garden. At 10 in the morning, Meng Qingcheng walked into Tang Yu's office with a printed list of phone numbers in his hand. He put it in front of Tang Yu and sat down opposite him. "I've asked around." The day before the engagement, Pei Chichi was alone and asked the bodyguards not to follow him. He must have gone to meet someone. There's a number on the phone, and it matches the time. It should be the person who met Pei Chichi. Tang Yu held the piece of paper and looked at it. Meng Qingcheng pointed at the number. "It's here." "Look." Tang Yu picked up his phone and dialed the number, but there was a voice message. "Sorry, the number you dialed is not in service. Please check before dialing." Meng Qingcheng also heard it and said calmly, "It seems like this person consciously used a smurf to contact Pei Xiaoqi." Tang Yu knew that too. He thought for a while and said, "Are there any other clues?" "I don't think so. I think we should follow it. Maybe we can find something else." Meng Qingcheng shook his head and suggested. Tang Yu's slender fingers fiddled with his phone. After a while, he said calmly, "Get someone to monitor her phone. Also, get someone to watch her. Report to me if anything unusual happens." Meng Qingcheng shrugged and smiled. "Are you sure? What about Sun Feifei? Who will be the big one? But I don't think Pei Chichi will be willing." Tang Yu glared at him fiercely. "Okay, pretend I didn't say anything." Meng Qingcheng raised his hand and suddenly sighed. "Pei Xiaoqi has been burning incense for several lifetimes." Tang Yu's voice was deep. "Don't alarm her." Meng Qingcheng chuckled softly. "I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to hold it in. Last night, you slept at her place. How could you hold it in?" He hadn't had sex for a few months. A little lamb was right in front of his mouth. How could he not eat it? Tang Yu ignored him and flipped open the document. "All right, you can leave now." After Meng Qingcheng left, he put down the pen in his hand and let out a long sigh. Indeed, he probably had internal injuries. However, before Tang Yu could find anything, he received news that the Pei Group was preparing to move. As for that piece of land, it was bought by Pei Ming many years ago. Now, it had risen to a few billion yuan, and it was the most valuable thing in the Pei Group. Tang Yu knew very well who she was leaving to avoid. "Little liar, you said you didn't want to that night." It was clearly not the end of the world. However, he still approved of her doing this. Pei Chichi actually had some business acumen. Xiao Ran stood in front of Tang Yu, not daring to make a sound. In the past few months, the CEO had been in a bad mood, and the employees of Shengyuan hadn't been having a good time either. It was supposed to be the off-season at the end of the year, but they had managed to achieve results in the peak season. However, this didn't make the CEO smile. His expression became colder and colder. Although he was still handsome, she still missed the approachable CEO. "Where is the Pei Group going to move?" Tang Yu squeezed the invitation, his voice tense. Xiao Ran answered quickly, "In the VIP lounge of the Pearl Hotel." Chapter 329. Xiao Ran thought in his heart, "It's so lively." Tang Yu looked at the time. It was the 5th day of the first lunar month. She couldn't wait. "Tell the organizer that I'll be there," Tang Yu said lightly. Xiao Ran wasn't surprised, but he felt pity for Sun Feifei. She had already taken half a step into the Tang family and might have to take it back. After Xiao Ran left, Tang Yu sat quietly. The phone on the table rang. He picked it up. It was the second secretary's voice. "President, Miss Sun is looking for you. Should I put her through?" Tang Yu was stunned for a moment before he remembered that it was Sun Feifei. She would have a concert at Sound Nest on New Year's Eve. Sheng Yuan was the investor and had invested 100 million yuan. He still needed to cooperate with Sun Feifei while maintaining this superficial relationship with her. Of course, more importantly, he wanted her to cooperate with him. Put her through, Tang Yu said lightly, then pulled his tie and waited. After a while, Sun Feifei said, Tang Yu, I'm reminding you that my concert is the day after tomorrow. As my boyfriend, don't forget. He let out a faint yen sound, extremely cold and indifferent. Sun Feifei didn't know why she used to be so infatuated with him. He was clearly a man without a heart. Also, my parents asked if you would like to have a reunion dinner with us after the concert. She admitted that she was making things difficult for him. Tang Yu's voice was deep. I think from the day we work together, we have to at least make sure that the other party won't be the one holding us back. If you need me to solve such a simple problem for you, then I don't mind changing teammates. Sun Feifei knew that he was calling her a pig-like teammate. She was furious, but she couldn't show it. Because the conditions he had given her were very tempting. She wanted to be famous and needed a strong backer in the music industry. She wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to soar to the top. Okay, I'll explain to them myself, she said in a low voice. Then, Tang Yu hung up. Sun Feifei really wanted to scold someone, but there was no one to scold. She was really sure that Tang Yu did not have any feelings for her. Otherwise, a man could not be so cold. Tang Yu hung up the phone and made another call to Meng Qingcheng. Cooperate with Sun Feifei's agent and report the concert to all the major media outlets. Meng Qingcheng knew him best. Of course, he knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said, I will definitely let Pei Xiaoqi see how much you love Sun Feifei. Wasn't it easy to make a woman jealous? Throwing money like crazy to another woman. Therefore, within a day, the road signs, billboards, and electronic screens in B City were filled with the news of the concert held by Soundnest. Furthermore, the title of the main character was, The Future Wife of Sheng Yuan's CEO. These overwhelming advertisements were all done by Sheng Yuan, so it was hard for Pei Chichi not to know about them. She drove the car, and Sun Feifei's figure flashed by all the way. Occasionally, some of the more explicit advertisements directly used photos of Tang Yu and Sun Feifei to combine. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and drove to the Pearl Hotel. She had come to confirm the situation of the auction venue on the 5th day of the new year. To her surprise, when she proposed the relocation of the Pei Group, everyone was in favor of it. Because the land was also part of the Pei Group's equity. The land was dead, and now that it had been exchanged for money, everyone was in favor of it. Chapter 330. After confirming the venue, she came out. There were a few temporary workers handing out flyers at the entrance. Seeing Pei Chichi coming over, they immediately came up to her enthusiastically. Miss, this is our Miss Sun Feifei's concert at Soundnest. You must go and listen. Miss Sun Feifei is the youngest pianist in the country, and this concert was created by Mr. Tang from Sheng Yuan for her. There may be some mysterious interaction. Of course, there will be a live broadcast on the big screen of Sheng Yuan building. Pei Chichi didn't reach out to take it. She just put on her sunglasses indifferently and walked towards her car. However, no matter where she went today, there were people handing out flyers and forcing those flyers with Tang Yu and Sun Feifei's names into her hands. There were about 10 flyers stuffed in her car. Sitting down, Pei Chichi took the piece of paper and looked at it. Then, he smiled bitterly. He used to dote on her like this, and now, he also doted on others like this. She thought back to that night. She thought about how he had stopped abruptly. He had said that he had a girlfriend. Yes, he had a girlfriend. She could tell that Sun Feifei was a good person. She was very suitable for him. Pei Chichi started the car expressionlessly. Tang Yu, I won't cry, I won't cry. This city made her feel suffocated. She couldn't breathe because he was everywhere. For the first time, Pei Chichi felt that auctioning the land was a wise choice. It was New Year's Eve. With Sheng Yuan's actions, even though the Soundnest had only been built for a few days, the seats for a few thousand people were all filled. All the major media outlets were scrambling to report, and the spotlights of B City were shining brightly. Sun Feifei stood beside Tang Yu amidst the dazzling lights. She felt that although Tang Yu wasn't a good person, his money was a good thing. She had played the piano for so long, but she had never been so glamorous. She smiled sweetly. After thinking for a while, she wrapped her arms around Tang Yu's. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes, but he didn't push her away. Instead, he smiled at the cameras. All of this was accurately transmitted to the live stream in front of Shengyuan Tower. On New Year's Eve, there was no one in front of the building except for Pei Chichi, who was wearing a thick coat. She sat in the square, hugging herself as she watched him stand with another woman. She stared at his face. Actually, Tang Yu, this way, we can stay up together and celebrate the new year together. She allowed herself one last indulgence, just one last time, to look at him like this. Pei Chichi closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she only saw Sun Feifei sitting in front of the piano, quietly playing, and Tang Yu was nowhere to be seen. There would be a mysterious interaction later on. Pei Chichi smiled as she picked up a can of beer and poured it into her mouth. She wasn't used to drinking, so she choked on the wine and started tearing up. That feeling was the same as smoking for the first time. However, ever since Tang Yu had spanked her little but that time, she had never spanked him again. Pei Chichi smiled and finished the can of beer in a short while. She had brought 6 bottles with her. I haven't congratulated you yet. She smiled foolishly at the screen. The moonlight shone on her, making her look exceptionally lonely. She loved him so much that her heart ached. The more she loved him, the more she didn't dare to be with him. Tang Yu, I often think that if I loved you less, would I have the courage to be with you? To hell with the guilt, to hell with the things that happened in our previous lives. We are who we are. Why should we pay for other people's actions? She muttered and shook her head. No, I can't do it when the person who gave birth to me hurt your mother like that. Chapter 331. She remembered the night before their engagement, when he had told her that he would have had a sister. When he said those words, his expression was somewhat disappointed, but also somewhat angry. This anger came from Zhao Ku. Pei Chichi smiled and looked up. She held the beer can against the strong wind. Tang Yu, Happy New Year. She drank a lot of beer and got drunk. She sat there and smiled foolishly. She watched Sun Feifei perform on the big screen with tears in her eyes. But where was Tang Yu? Why didn't he appear again? Pei Chichi felt dizzy and smiled foolishly. It was Lunar New Year's Eve. She had never spent Lunar New Year's Eve with Tang Yu. Previously, she had thought that she would spend Lunar New Year's Eve with him for the rest of her life. When she was young, when she was middle-aged, and when she was old, they would always be together. She finished the beer that she brought and was drunk. She was surrounded by Tang Yu's shadow. She stood on the empty square and screamed like a lunatic. Tang Yu, but where was he? She stood there alone. It was as if she was the only one left in the whole world. Those whom she cared about, those who cared about her, had left her. Dad, Chen Xinjie, Jinrong, Tang Yu. She hugged her body and squatted down slowly. Her little face was calm as if she had fallen asleep. After a while, she suddenly stood up and started to dance on the square, just like that night when she danced with Tang Yu. Pei Chichi jumped, spun, and spun tirelessly. She felt dizzy, but she felt much better. It was only in this half-awake, half-asleep state that he was still hers. She didn't know if she was the one who made the sound. It was hoarse and powerful, echoing continuously between the buildings. Tang Yu belonged to Pei Chichi. One sound after another, she stood there and smiled foolishly. She muttered, Tang Yu is mine. Tang Yu stood a distance away and looked at her quietly. Pei Chichi, you coward. Beside him was the building's security guard. He looked at Pei Chichi with some difficulty. Such a ruckus could be considered as disturbing the residents, right? But looking at the CEO's expression, he seemed pretty happy. Wasn't the president supposed to be at Sun Feifei's concert? Why did he come here to see Miss Pei get drunk? It was Miss Pei who told the president that she was coming. Good heavens! Good heavens! The security guard's eyes widened as he watched Pei Chichi smash the huge LCD screen in front of Sheng Yuan with something unknown. A shattering sound was heard. Then, Tang Yu quickly ran over and hugged Pei Chichi, bringing her away from there. Sparks flew everywhere. Sheng Yuan's sign fell. Sheng Yuan's sign was smashed. Sheng Yuan's sign fell, however. Tang Yu was smiling happily. He hugged the drunk murderer in the winter night and buried his face in her little neck. Because he had drunk wine, it was very warm. "Little liar," he said angrily. He said angrily. Then, he moved his face and moved his lips from her cheek to her lips. Even though the weather was very cold, the temperature of their bodies was extremely high. Pei Chichi was drunk. She was in a daze as he hugged her and kissed her. It was a little unreal. Her little hand was raised high and landed on his face. He quickly caught her hand and wrapped it around his neck. "I must be dreaming," she murmured. Tang Yu was panting, but he was still hugging her. Then, he raised his head and looked at Sheng Yuan's screen. She giggled, and her little mouth did not stop kissing here and there. He exhaled a heavy and difficult breath to make sure that she was really drunk. He asked again in a hoarse voice, "Chichi, who am I?" "Daddy." She hugged him very affectionately. On the other hand, Tang Yu's face darkened. Did she think that he was Pei Ming? How could she kiss Pei Ming like that? His face was completely dark, but she buried her whole face on his back. "Daddy Tang Yu." Chapter 333. Tang Yu turned his head sideways and used one hand to pull her little head over and kiss her fiercely. She struggled on the back, but she could not break free. She was in a mess, and her neck was in pain. He also knew that he was being impulsive. Many people were looking at them like that. He finally had enough kissing. He patted her fluffy little head as a compliment, as if he was treating a little pet. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Tang Yu put her down, took off his coat and wrapped it around her, and carried her on his back again. It was not that they could not take the car, but he wanted to carry her on his back and continue walking. Pei Chichi was a little sleepy on his back, but she could not bear to sleep, so she lay on his back and sang. Every song was unpleasant to listen to, but Tang Yu liked it very much. "Our Chichi sings really well." He smiled and carried the little one on his back very lightly. After walking for 2 hours, they finally arrived at her apartment. After putting her down, Pei Chichi blocked the door, and her little hand gently scratched his chest. She was drunk and her eyes were hazy. "This is my home. Tang Yu, shouldn't you be accompanying your fiancé?" Her expression was very childish, but her actions were a little seductive. Tang Yu stared at her and smiled faintly. "Chichi, have you forgotten that you are the one dreaming now?" "Dreaming?" Yes. She was indeed dreaming. Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu. Her gaze was fixated on him, like a little wolf looking at a meat bone. Tang Yu smiled faintly, and his hand was holding his coat. He said softly, "Chichi, open the door." She then rummaged through her pocket, but she could not find the key. At that moment, Tang Yu's heart was breaking down. Imagine a man who had endured for 2 hours, and when he reached the door, he did not have the key. He suddenly pulled her into his arms and kissed her passionately. She was barely breathing in his arms, and her little face was burning hot. The coldness outside had suddenly disappeared, and even the thin layer of snow on her clothes had become boiling hot. Tang Yu hugged her with one arm and buried her face in his chest. Then, he kicked her hard. The door opened, an innocent door. They stumbled into the room, kissing, and the door was kicked shut. Pei Chichi was pressed down on the sofa and kissed. She sat in his arms, looking a mess. Her hair was all over the place, and her coat had been tossed aside, folded together with his coat. It was even wrapped around his shirt. She looked so messy, her hand pressed against his scalp. She felt as if she was standing in the clouds and was in a daze. Too much alcohol made her unable to tell if this was a dream or reality. Let's just treat it as a dream. She was drunk. As the kiss deepened, Tang Yu could no longer control himself. He exhaled deeply. "Chichi, who am I?" "Daddy." She buried her face in his chest and nibbled on him. If he continued to tolerate it, he would not be a man. He carried her into the bathroom. Pei Chichi was tortured to the point where she wished she was dead, but he still continued to ask, "Do you like Jinrong?" He held her little face and asked harshly. That little woman nodded her head in a silly manner. Yes. She used to like him. She was quite honest. Tang Yu was about to go mad with anger. She was really honest, and he hit her hard with his big hand. Chapter 334. Pei Chichi looked at him and swallowed her saliva. You look delicious. Tang Yu pursed his thin lips slightly and watched as she slowly squatted down. He had never known that Pei Chichi had such a hobby. However, such a hobby was the best thing for a man. He pulled her fluffy hair. It was a little painful, but more than that, he was happy. On New Year's Eve, the fireworks outside rose one by one into the night sky and blossomed on the gorgeous black silk curtain. They were like two fishes, entangled with each other. This was probably what the ancients meant by the joy of fish in water. Tang Yu seemed like he didn't know what fatigue was, and Pei Chichi looked like she didn't know what to eat next. Time was weary, but both of them were willing. When Pei Chichi woke up, it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. When she got up, her body felt like it had been run over by a truck, and her head hurt. She held her forehead and looked around. There was nothing different. It was her bedroom, and everything was clean. Even she was wearing a set of pajamas. Did she drink too much? But in her mind, she vaguely remembered that she seemed to be with Tang Yu. It must be a hallucination. She lifted the blanket and got out of bed. She couldn't remember how she came back. When she walked to the bathroom to brush her teeth, her pajamas slid down. Her skin was fair and delicate, and there was no sign of being touched. However, Pei Chichi still felt that her body was a little strange. As for what this strange feeling was, she couldn't explain it. She only felt a little tired and sore. What was more frightening was that her lips were a little numb, as if she had eaten something for a long time. She flipped through it carefully, and suddenly, a lot of unhealthy images flashed in her mind. In the misty bathroom, she knelt in front of Tang Yu, looking up at him. Pei Chichi's eyes widened. She couldn't believe that she had really done this. She didn't rinse the toothpaste properly. She looked around the house and went to the bathroom to take a closer look, but she couldn't find anything. She bit her lips and covered her face. Maybe she really had a dream. When she went downstairs, her car was no longer there. She hailed a cab and headed to Sheng Yuan building. She saw her car there, but it was wrecked. She didn't know which brat had used paint to paint her car. Love. It's so full that I can't wipe it off. Pei Chichi looked around and saw that the murderer was long gone. A short video was playing on Sheng Yuan's gigantic screen. She widened her eyes. It was actually Tang Yu. He leaned against the railing of the courtyard. He was wearing a grey sweater and looked very homey. He held a glass of red wine in his hand and said a few words of blessing with a smile. That short video kept repeating itself. Pei Chichi's eyes felt a little hot. Was it because he was with Sun Feifei last night that he was in such a good mood? Pei Chichi didn't know how long she watched it. Then, she kicked the car hard, and the car started to scream. She bit her lip and opened the car door. She drove the car through the streets, and it was quite eye-catching. She looked for a car wash, but after looking at it, they said that it couldn't be washed off and would have to be repainted. It was Chinese New Year, and the 4S store was probably closed. Moreover, she needed a car. She decided to bear with it. She drove around again. Since it was Chinese New Year, there weren't many people around. Chapter 335. As she drove, she started to feel a little lonely. Pei Chichi wanted to go to the hospital to see Jinrong, but the nurse said that the Lins had taken Jinrong home. She stood at the entrance of the nursing home for a long time. Perhaps, she would never see Jinrong in this lifetime. Later, she parked her car in the parking lot of the shopping mall and walked around. Only by walking non-stop would she not feel that the new year was so cold and cheerless. The LCD screens in the shopping mall were all playing Tang Yu's short videos. It was simply crazy. Pei Chichi felt that he was everywhere. At a restaurant on the first floor, Pei Chichi met Pei Huan. Standing outside the restaurant, she was hesitating about whether she should go in to eat when she saw Pei Huan. Pei Huan was with a middle-aged man. That man looked quite decent, good-looking, and had good taste. It was just that at this age, he was old enough to be Pei Huan's uncle, and it could be imagined that he had a family. Pei Chichi had never thought that the arrogant Pei Huan would go down this path. She was a little stunned and stood there for a long time without being able to move away. At this moment, Pei Huan saw her and leaned over to say something to the man beside her. The man turned his head and saw Pei Chichi. He smiled and got up to leave. Pei Huan waved at Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and walking in. The waiter enthusiastically recommended her. Pei Chichi said indifferently, "I have an appointment." She walked straight to Pei Huan and sat down opposite her. For a long time, the two of them looked at each other without saying a word. Finally, Pei Huan chuckled. "Long time no see." Pei Chichi pursed her lips. "Yes. Long time no see." Pei Huan supported her chin with her beautiful hand and smiled. "Pei Chichi, are you going to ask me who the man was just now? All right then, who is that man?" Pei Chichi was expressionless. Pei Huan's smile was a little charming, which did not match her age. She played with the wine glass in one hand and spat out 2 words from her red lips. "Godfather." Pei Chichi remained silent. "Pei Chichi, you are a pure girl from the Pei family. Don't tell me you don't know what a godfather means." Pei Huan smiled like a cat. "It means that you are my father in the day and you can do whatever you want at night." She smiled and became a little annoyed. She waved at the waiter and ordered a few expensive dishes. Then she looked at Pei Chichi and said, "See? Even without the Pei family and the Lin family, I was still living a good life. Pei Chichi, what you have, I have. What you don't have, I also have." As she spoke, she took out a long and thin cigarette from her bag, lit it skillfully, and puffed out a cloud of smoke. This reminded Pei Chichi of Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku was also like this. She could smoke very seductively. You must have had a hard time without Tang Yu, right? I also saw that Tang Yu has a new girlfriend, and she looks pretty good. Pei Huan felt a little happy in his heart. "Why are you looking at me like that? Do you think that I have fallen?" "Pei Chichi, stop it. We sell it all the same." Pei Chichi looked down and smiled. "Yes, it's the same. It's the same. Try smoking. After smoking, you will forget Lin Jinrong, forget Tang Yu, and forget everything about the Pei family." Pei Huan stared at Pei Chichi with her slender eyes. She leaned forward and put the cigarette butt in front of Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi felt choked. Chapter 336. Pei Chichi was shocked. "So what? Pei Chichi, do you still think you're that spotless little saint from before? Without Tang Yu, you're just a piece of meat on the cutting board. When those men want to eat you up, you won't be able to escape." Pei Huan sneered as she put the cigarette to her lips. Pei Chichi only felt sorry for her. "All right, I'm in a good mood today. Let's have a meal together. Speaking of which, we're considered a family." Pei Huan put out the cigarette. "Let's eat. It's quite pitiful to see you alone." Only Pei Chichi's loneliness could comfort her. It made her feel that she, Pei Huan, was not the most pitiful one. She, Pei Chichi, had fallen in love with Tang Yu, but she was also abandoned. Pei Huan looked as if she had seen through the world. She pointed out, "Men are all the same. They only covet your young body. When they pamper you, you're a baby. When they're done playing with you, you're nothing." Pei Chichi remained silent. She only felt that Pei Huan had changed a lot. "Do you know? I'm in the entertainment industry now. That man just now is the vice president of King Entertainment. He can make me famous." Pei Huan said nonchalantly, "I just need to sleep with him." "Really?" Pei Chichi stared into her eyes. "Is that what you want? What about your love for Jinrong?" Pei Huan's eyes were originally smiling, but now they became a little sharp. "Love? Pei Chichi, don't be funny. I love him, but does he love me? He gave you his heart and his life. What did he leave for me? A child? I'm so young. Am I supposed to watch over him for the rest of my life? What if Jinrong wakes up one day?" Pei Chichi closed her eyes. "Pei Huan, won't you regret it then?" Pei Huan was stunned for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. How is that possible? He won't wake up. With that said, she chuckled. So what if he's awake? He still likes you. And that man just now, he can give me happiness. Being with him, I can taste the happiness of a woman, instead of being a widow with Lin Jinrong. Pei Chichi, do you know what it feels like to be a widow? Do you know how it feels to be left out by your husband? Don't you know that Lin Jinrong only touched me once? Isn't that ironic? Pei Huan raised her head. From the moment I aborted the child, I told myself that I would never love him again. Pei Chichi was speechless. She and Pei Huan sat face to face and ordered a table full of dishes, but neither of them touched anything. Before leaving, Pei Huan said, Pei Chichi, the hatred between the two of us will never be resolved in this lifetime. Pei Chichi looked at the boundless night and smiled faintly. Pei Huan, you could have lived another life. She was the one who had cut off her own path. It was her willfulness that had caused her to live such a miserable life. When Pei Huan went out to get her car, she saw a car that had been sprayed messily. It was written all over in English. As she looked at it, her eyes felt a little warm, because it was all written with the word love. However, when she saw what was inside, it turned out to be Pei Chichi's car. Then, Pei Huan's gaze froze. Slowly, bitterly, she smiled. Pei Chichi, you're such a fool. You actually don't know how much Tang Yu loves you. On the chassis of the car, there were two inconspicuous English letters, Ty. Pei Chichi, I won't tell you. Just let you struggle. Pei Huan raised her head and there were some tears in her eyes. Chapter 337. Pei Chichi sat there for a long time, so long that the waiter asked her softly, Miss, do you need a takeaway? She turned her head and looked at the waiter, her gaze a little dazed. Miss, do you need a takeaway? The waiter was especially patient when faced with such a beautiful girl. Pei Chichi pursed her lips, looked at the dishes that had not been touched, and said calmly, take it to the takeaway. Although she was very hungry, she did not have much of an appetite after meeting Pei Huan. Although she did not like Pei Huan, and just as Pei Huan had said, the hatred would never be resolved in this lifetime, Pei Huan was still her father's child. No matter how ruthless Pei Chichi was, she still felt a little pity for Pei Huan. She walked out with the lunchbox and did not get her car. Instead, she wandered on the streets. Behind her, there seemed to be someone following her. When Pei Chichi turned around, the person was gone. After walking 2 streets, Pei Chichi placed the lunchbox on a platform in a green belt and continued to walk forward. She walked to the corner and stopped. She looked in that direction. A woman with a little girl walked over quietly and picked up the lunchbox. The woman was wearing very old clothes, and so was the little girl. At this moment, the woman opened the lunchbox and carefully fed the food inside to the little girl. Probably because she had never eaten such delicious food before, the little girl ate in a hurry, and the woman was a little anxious. Pei Chichi looked from afar and saw a small car next to the woman. There were some purified water bottles on it. The little girl had probably been exposed to the elements for a long time. Her skin was a little dark, and her eyes were even more distinct. As she ate, she looked up and saw Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and smiled warmly at her. Then, she gestured for her to wait there. Pei Chichi quickly ran to the mall and bought a beautiful rabbit the size of a child. She took out her card and withdrew about 100,000 yuan from all the teller machines. It was packed thickly in a bag and carefully wrapped in another layer. She ran out, but the little girl was still standing there, waiting for her. Pei Chichi slowed down and ran over again. She stuffed the soft rabbit and the heavy bag into the little girl's arms. She said in a low voice, Happy New Year. The little girl's face was red. Pei Chichi reached out and patted her head. You have to listen to your mother. The woman at the side stood far away. After Pei Chichi left, she walked over and opened the things in her daughter's arms. She was shocked to see that it was a neatly tied-up bag of money. There were about 100,000 yuan in it. He couldn't accept it. But if he searched everywhere, where would he find Pei Chichi? Mommy. The little girl hugged the rabbit and said softly, Mommy, can we rest today? The woman hugged her child tightly. Her lips were dry and cracked, but she still kissed her daughter solemnly. "All right, Mommy will rest for a day. Now, I'll take Ruoruo to buy some new clothes." After they left, Pei Chichi walked out from behind. She was a little jealous and envious. She had never been hugged by any woman before, and she didn't know what it felt like. She had only been hugged by Tang Yu. Chapter 338. She looked down and saw that it was a call from Tang Xin. After some thought, she picked it up. Tang Xin said in a sobbing voice, "Chichi, my dad and mom are fighting. They're so fierce." They had fought before, but not like today. Pei Chichi was stunned. Tang Xin continued, "I heard that dad slapped mom a few times because of some photo. Chichi, dad has never hit mom like that before." Pei Chichi was speechless. She didn't want to get involved in Zhao Ke's affairs. "Chichi, can you bring me to your place for a few days?" Tang Xin begged. Afraid that she wouldn't agree, she quickly said, "Brother has to stay with auntie. Besides, he has a girlfriend now." Tang Xin stopped. She knew that she had said the wrong thing. Pei Chichi didn't mind. She smiled faintly. "What if your dad and mom are worried?" Tang Xin pretended to be indifferent. "It's fine. I'll tell them that I'm at my brother's place. It's not like this hasn't happened before. They can't control me when they fight." Pei Chichi sighed. In the end, she agreed. Maybe it was loneliness. She went to get her car and drove to Yanghui, where she had arranged to meet Tang Xin. Yanghui. Tang Xin packed a small bag and carefully walked down the stairs. She didn't want Tang Jiyuan and Zhao Ku to see her. Tang Jiyuan's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed Zhao Ku's hair and forced her to look up. "Look carefully. The photo is not of you. Who is it?" Zhao Ku swallowed hard and didn't dare to make a sound. She saw a photo of herself lying on the bed. She was naked and only wrapped in a bath towel. Her face was a little blurry, but those who knew her could tell that it was her. This photo was published in the entertainment headlines today. Tang Jiyuan was also a person who liked to read entertainment news. When he saw it, he slapped Zhao Ku a few times. He was still angry. He, Tang Jiyuan, was a respectable man. Although he knew that Zhao Ku was a little unbearable in the past and had been with a few men, he didn't care because he didn't love her. Now that she had Tang Xin and her beauty, all she had to do was to behave herself. Moreover, even if she was cheating on him, as long as she didn't embarrass herself, he wouldn't care. They had been together for a long time. But now, he had caused such a huge commotion. Would he still have any face left in the future? Tang Jiyuan pressed Zhao Ku's head to the front of the newspaper and let her read it herself. Zhao Ku's hair was in a mess. She looked like a crazy woman, her lips trembling as she looked at the photo. She recognized it. It was the place where she and Rong Lei had their rendezvous. This photo should be several years old. This bastard. Last time, he said he would delete all the photos. Just because he had asked her for 1 million 2 days ago and she had refused to give it to him, he had set her up like this. Zhao Ku gritted her teeth. "Jiyuan, this is all in the past. It's not like you don't know." Tang Jiyuan slapped him again. "Things from the past? Zhao Ku, do you think I'm stupid? Isn't the ring on your finger a wedding ring?" Zhao Ku couldn't deny it anymore. Chapter 339. Zhao Ku knew that Tang Jiyuan cared about Tang Xin, but he cared more about his reputation. Even if she didn't die this time, she would lose a layer of skin. She couldn't live without the title of Mrs. Tang. She didn't want to live the life she had before. Thinking of those days, thinking of the grey walls, the worn-out furniture, and the dirty man, it was even worse than killing Zhao Ku. She knelt in front of Tang Jiyuan and confessed, "Jiyuan, I was wrong. I promise that I will never see him again, and I will never have these pictures again." Tang Jiyuan grabbed her hair and lifted her in front of him. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Suddenly, he threw her away. "You're on your own." Zhao Ku lay on the ground and didn't get up for a long time. She just coughed. After a long time, she pushed herself up and walked to Tang Xin's room. But it was empty. What about Tang Xin? Where did she go? Zhao Ke's heart was in a mess. Tang Jiyuan didn't divorce her because of Tang Xin. Otherwise, he would have insisted on remarrying Lin Yun last time. So, she wanted to hold on to her daughter tightly. As long as Tang Xin was there and Tang Xin called him daddy, Tang Jiyuan wouldn't bear to divorce her. Zhao Ke looked for Tang Xin like a madwoman. She called her number, but it was turned off. Finally, she called Tang Yu. Tang Yu was surprised to receive her call. He looked at his mother without batting an eyelid, then walked outside and said, "Wait a moment, I'll send someone to take a look." In the past, when Tang Xin ran away from home, she would go to Xia City. But now that he didn't live in Xia City, Tang Xin naturally wouldn't go there. He hung up, thought for a moment, and dialed Pei Chichi's number. When Pei Chichi picked up the phone, she saw Tang Xin running towards her. She looked at the number and answered, "Hello." Tang Yu's voice was especially cold. "Is Tang Xin with you?" Pei Chichi saw that Tang Xin had opened the car door and was sitting beside her. "Yes, she's with me." Tang Yu was silent for a moment. "Got it." He hung up the phone with just 3 words. Pei Chichi looked at the phone, not sure what he meant. "Got it." So he didn't want her to send Tang Xin back. He put down his phone and looked at Tang Xin. Tang Xin's hands were clasped together, as if she was trying to please him. "Your brother is calling." Pei Chichi asked, "Do you want me to send you to him?" "It's okay." Tang Xin said anxiously, "Big brother is always with Auntie during the New Year. Auntie won't be happy if I go." Pei Chichi looked at her and didn't say anything. She started the car. Tang Xin immediately buckled her seatbelt and said fawningly, "Chichi, your car film looks really cool. Where did you put it?" "It was scribbled on, not pasted." Pei Chichi glanced at her. "Aren't you afraid that your parents will be worried?" Xin played with Xin looked down, "They can Chong's Shan. Tang can't do it. Can you let me stay with you for a few days?" She begged Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She drove back to where she lived. When the car stopped, Tang Xin was sure that she was safe. She sat still and said softly, "What did brother say?" Chapter 340. Pei Chichi glanced at her. "Nothing. So I can stay with you?" Tang Xin asked carefully. Pei Chichi saw many little stars in her eyes, and a sense of kinship rose in her heart. She thought that with Zhao Ke around, she wouldn't have too many feelings for Tang Xin. But Tang Xin was different. She was as weak as a small animal, which made people want to love her. Pei Chichi reached out and gently touched Tang Xin's little head. "It should be fine for now." Tang Xin was satisfied even if it was for now. She opened the car door and hopped out. Then, she took out her phone and took selfies with Pei Chichi's car. But she also saw that her mother had called. Tang Xin chose to ignore it. When Pei Chichi walked over, Tang Xin put away her phone. "Chichi, I've posted it on my friend circle. Don't worry, I blocked it. She won't be able to see it." Pei Chichi was annoyed and amused at the sight of her trying to please her. She brought her to her apartment and settled her down. When she pushed the door open, Tang Xin cheered and jumped on the sofa with all her might. She had never been so wild before, and her pale face was flushed. Pei Chichi brought her bag into the guest room. When she came out, Tang Xin was lying on the sofa and said softly, "I like this sofa the most. It's so comfortable." Pei Chichi shook her head and walked into the kitchen. Then, she came out again. "Tang Xin, I'm going to the supermarket to buy some ingredients. Are you coming with me or staying at home?" Tang Xin jumped up. "Of course I'm going with you." When she got into the car again, Tang Xin lowered her head and played with her phone. She saw a comment from Tang Yu in her friend circle. "Where is it?" Tang Xin stole a glance at Chichi. Seeing that she was focused on driving, she sent a private message to Tang Yu. "I'm going to the supermarket with Chichi. Chichi wants to cook for me." After she sent the message, she waited for a long time, but nothing happened. Really. There was no reaction at all. She thought that her brother loved Chichi so much that he couldn't forget her. It turned out that when there was a new person, they would forget the old one. How was that Sun Feifei better than Chichi? She was beautiful, but she was like a wooden beauty. She couldn't be compared to her Chichi. Tang Xin pouted and did not say anything. She was a little disappointed. Actually, she wanted to call her brother over. She hoped that her brother and Chichi could be together. After all, Tang Xin was still a child. She couldn't keep her thoughts to herself. After a while, she asked pitifully, "Chichi, do you really not like my brother?" Pei Chichi did not reply. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Tang Xin, don't ask questions like that again. Your brother has a girlfriend now. It'll be bad if you misunderstand." Tang Xin buried her head and looked outside, sighing, "Chichi, if I were you, I'd definitely like my brother." In Tang Xin's heart, Tang Yu was the embodiment of perfection. Pei Chichi smiled and did not say anything. Tang Xin looked out of the window and suddenly felt a little sad. She saw Chichi and her brother together. How loving they were. Could it be that none of this was true? If that was not true, then what was true? But no one could answer Tang Xin's question. She could only look outside. Chapter 341. Pei Chichi brought Tang Xin to the supermarket. For the first time, Tang Xin felt that it was a fresh experience. She even asked Pei Chichi to push her in a small cart as if she was a child. Pei Chichi pinched her little face and agreed in the end. Tang Xin stood in the cart and ordered. She shouted excitedly, "Chichi, go over there and have a look. Look at the chilies there. They look so pretty. You know they are chilies." Pei Chichi smiled and took a box. She then picked some seafood, meat, and vegetables. Tang Xin's mouth watered. "Chichi, are you really going to cook for me?" Tang Xin whispered. Pei Chichi nodded and focused on picking. She even bought some daily necessities for Tang Xin. Tang Xin was still a child. She was forced to use the princess series in the past. She was already tired of looking at the pink ones. She picked some cartoon ones to her heart's content. Her favorite was the bunny one. Pei Chichi satisfied her. She was a child after all. For some reason, Pei Chichi's heart softened when she saw Tang Xin's happy face. If she was happy, he would be happy as well. She shook her head and laughed at herself. She pushed Tang Xin to the living area. When she was about to pick a pair of slippers, she saw someone she shouldn't have seen. Tang Yu and Sun Feifei were there too. Sun Feifei's fingers were clasped on Tang Yu's arm. She was holding a pair of pink slippers in her hand. She was looking up and talking to Tang Yu as if she was asking for his opinion. Pei Chichi stopped in her tracks. Tang Xin called out to her brother, but she acted as if she didn't see Sun Feifei. Tang Yu looked over. He glanced at Pei Chichi's face and finally at Tang Xin. He asked calmly, "Why did you come out?" Tang Xin was a little angry. In the past, when Chichi was with her brother, she would throw herself at him. No matter if it was Chichi or her brother, she would always be able to hug one of them. But now, Sun Feifei was clinging to her brother like an octopus. "I want to celebrate the new year with Chichi." Tang Xin pouted. "Chichi has no one by her side. I have to accompany her." She was angry at Tang Yu too. "Brother, you should accompany the others. I'll be fine with Chichi." In the past, if she was angry, Tang Yu would coax her. But this time, Tang Yu actually nodded. "That's good too. I'll pick you up. Also, I told your mother that you'll be with me." Xin, was Xin's words. Tang Xin had failed to achieve her goal, so she bit her lips and sulked. Pei Chichi's gaze was somewhat dazed. She kept staring at him, forgetting the existence of her surroundings. Tang Yu acted as if he didn't see Pei Chichi. He looked at the slippers in Sun Feifei's hands and said indifferently, "I'll take this pair." The two of them left. Tang Xin was annoyed. "Chichi, forget it. I'll find a better man than my brother." When the two of them left, Tang Xin was annoyed by their lovey-dovey display. "Chichi, forget it. I'll find a better man than my brother." They left. Tang Xin was annoyed by their love. Chichi, forget it. Find a better man than my brother. In this city, she might see them often. She thought she should get used to it. But when they reached the checkout area, Pei Chichi still wasn't used to it. She bumped into Tang Yu and Sun Feifei. They seemed to be waiting for the checkout. Sun Feifei stood in front of Tang Yu. Tang Yu put one hand on her waist and the other hand reached for 2 boxes. Chapter 342. Pei Chichi was even more dazed. She stared at the things in his hands and did not come back to her senses for a long time. Although she knew that he and Sun Feifei would get together sooner or later, she did not expect it to be so soon. Her heart ached, but there was another voice that said to her, Pei Chichi, isn't this your own choice? Yes, it was her own choice. She looked down and did not want to look at it. After she paid and took the things down, Tang Xin walked beside her in silence. Obviously, Tang Xin saw it too. Chichi. Tang Xin called her softly and pulled her sleeve. Pei Chichi forced a smile. It's okay. She carried the things and walked straight ahead. Tang Xin followed behind with her mouth agape. Then, she covered her eyes. With a thud, Pei Chichi bumped into a human wall, and the voice that greeted him was one that he could not be more familiar with. She looked up and saw his handsome face, his handsome chin, his strong Adam's apple, and the hickeys on it. Hickeys. Something flashed in Pei Chichi's mind. She seemed to remember something. She remembered that ball of heat that was like a raging fire. However, she immediately felt sad. It was left by Sun Feifei. She was a little dazed. She could not move her eyes away and her body did not move. Only she knew that her legs were weak. She could not move at all. Tang Yu supported her politely and pushed her away from him. It was as if he did not notice her gaze. Then, he looked at Tang Xin. I'll pick you up tonight. Tang Xin was a little anxious. Didn't they agree to let her stay here? Just as she opened her mouth, Tang Yu walked towards Sun Feifei. The two of them got into the car together. Before Sun Feifei got in, she turned around and smiled at Pei Chichi. Tang Xin said unhappily, that woman is so sneaky. It's like she's showing off. She snorted lightly. If it weren't for her Chichi, how could Sun Feifei, that wooden beauty, get her turn? Pei Chichi didn't say anything. She carried the bags to her car. Before she started the car, she looked at Tang Xin and said seriously, your brother made his own choices. Don't ruin them. Tang Xin wanted to say something, but she swallowed her words. After returning home, Pei Chichi quietly cooked. Tang Xin could feel that she was in a bad mood, so she tried to cheer her up, but Pei Chichi only smiled faintly. Chichi, I think the one you like is my brother, Tang Xin suddenly said with certainty. As she spoke, she stared straight at Pei Chichi, as if she wanted to confirm it. Pei Chichi's fingers paused for a moment. She looked at Tang Xin for a moment, then smiled faintly without saying anything. Tang Xin jumped down from the counter and wrapped her arms around Chichi's arm. Chichi, isn't it? Pei Chichi pursed her lips. Nonsense. Tang Xin moved her body closer and said childishly, Chichi, do you dare to look at my eyes? If you dare to look at me for more than a minute and say that you don't like my brother, I'll believe you. Lame. Pei Chichi didn't want to play such childish games with her. Tang Xin pestered her. Chichi, Pei Chichi ignored her, so she jumped left and right like a little monkey. While they were fooling around, Pei Chichi's phone rang. She wiped her hands and said, Tang Xin, stop fooling around. The matter between me and your brother is over. As she spoke, she walked towards the living room. Tang Xin followed her like a shadow. Pei Chichi looked at the caller ID and hesitated. Should she pick it up? Because it was Tang Yu. Chapter 343. Tang Xin pinched her throat and mimicked what she had just said. Tang Xin, I'm done with your brother. Pei Chichi slapped her hand and glared at her before picking up the phone. What's up? Her tone was indifferent. The voice on the other end was even colder. Address. Hair. She was stunned. He seemed to be getting impatient. Your address. I'll come and pick Tang Xin up in a bit. Tang Xin heard it too. She was disappointed. Her brother had promised to let her stay here for a few days. Pei Chichi was also surprised. She looked at Tang Xin and finally gave him the address. Mr. Tang is so pretentious. We've been here for a night and he still doesn't know the address. As soon as he finished speaking, the other side hung up the phone mercilessly. Pei Chichi held the phone. She was actually afraid. She was afraid that Tang Yu would bring Sun Feifei over. If that happened, how could she endure it? Tang Xin pouted and pretended to be dead on the sofa. Tang Xin, listen to your brother. Pei Chichi was helpless. Her relationship with Tang Yu was strained. She couldn't speak for Tang Xin. Moreover, if she forced Tang Xin to stay here, it would seem like she had ulterior motives. Tang Xin's voice was muffled and couldn't be heard clearly. Looking at her, Pei Chichi's heart softened. After all, Tang Xin was still a child. She patted her. At least we can have a good meal. Tang Xin couldn't bear to see Pei Chichi suffer. No matter how disappointed she was, she still got up and clung to Pei Chichi. It was already 6 o'clock in the evening when dinner was ready. There were 4 stir-fried dishes, 2 cold dishes and a soup pot on the small dining table. Although they were home-cooked dishes, they looked delicious. Tang Xin forgot about what happened earlier. She secretly picked up a piece of meat. Pei Chichi patted her. Use chopsticks. Tang Xin stuck out her tongue and asked, "Can I have some wine?" Pei Chichi glanced at her. "Are you of age?" Tang Xin puffed her chest out. "Pei Chichi, you're not much older than me." Pei Chichi was amused. Just as she was laughing, the doorbell rang. She paused and then realized something. He looked down at the time. It was only a little over 6 o'clock. Is he here to pick up Tang Xin now? He glanced at Tang Xin, who was curled up like a little mouse, and shook his head. "I'll go open the door." When he opened the door, he saw Tang Yu. He had already changed into a new set of clothes. Compared to when he was with Sun Feifei in the afternoon, he now appeared more casual. He was wearing a black coat over a grey high-collared coat. The only thing that remained unchanged was his long, slender, and powerful legs. Pei Chichi looked down. "Are you taking her away now?" She could not make Tang Xin stay, but she hoped that Tang Xin could have a meal with her. It was the new year and she had no family. Tang Xin was the only family she had left. She thought that he would answer, yes or no. But that was not what he said. He asked her in a deep voice, "What about you? Do you want me to take her away or not?" Pei Chichi looked up and stared into his deep, dark eyes. She did not speak for a long time. His long legs were already in front of her. Tang Xin whimpered, "Brother, look at how good Chichi's cooking is." She looked at Tang Yu pleadingly. She did not want to leave. Tang Yu sat down at the dining table. He looked at the food and smiled. "It's really good." Chapter 344. "Do you mind if I eat with you?" he asked emotionlessly. But when he looked at Tang Xin, his gaze was warm. Pei Chichi felt a wave of weakness. He wants to eat with them? It's the new year. Is he sure he doesn't want to accompany his mother or Sun Feifei? She didn't move. Tang Yu frowned. "Miss Pei." Those 3 words widened the distance between them. Pei Chichi walked over. "I'll go get the food for you." Tang Xin shrieked, "I want to drink." As soon as she finished speaking, Tang Yu glanced at her, and Tang Xin didn't dare to say anything else. She curled up like a pitiful child. Pei Chichi didn't know why, but she felt like a mother hen protecting her chicks. She looked at Tang Yu. "You don't have to be so fierce to her. I'm teaching my sister a lesson." "What does that have to do with you, Miss Pei?" He looked at her coldly. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. "It doesn't matter, but this is my house." Tang Xin secretly gave her 100 thumbs up. Chichi was the first person who dared to challenge her brother's authority. However, Pei Chichi's leopard courage was only so little. After saying that, he escaped into the kitchen. Without her support, Tang Xin was very careful, afraid of angering the devil. "You want to stay here?" Tang Yu's tone was indifferent, as if he was asking casually. Tang Xin immediately nodded like a puppy. Tang Yu glanced at her and didn't say anything else. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Tang Yu became even bolder. Pei Chichi came over with the food and asked for a drink. Pei Chichi thought that Tang Xin would be leaving soon, so she went to get a bottle of red wine. Chichi, you drink too. Tang Xin didn't dare to drink alone. Her brother was right beside her, staring at her like a wolf. Pei Chichi poured a small glass for herself but not for Tang Yu. He had to drive later. She had no idea that she was the one he wanted to let go of. The atmosphere was still tense, but fortunately, Tang Xin was talkative enough. One of them was eating, while the other was sipping wine. As they sipped, they drank too much. Tang Xin knew that her body was weak, so she put down the glass after drinking half of it. On the other hand, Pei Chichi drank the entire bottle of red wine. As Tang Xin spoke, she noticed Pei Chichi's blushing face. Chichi, your face is so red. Tang Xin touched her carefully. She was a little worried. Red wine won't go bad. Tang Yu looked at his sister indifferently and then scolded softly, I'll help her in when you're done cleaning up. Tang Xin was stunned. I'll help Chichi in. She didn't dare to finish her sentence. Tang Yu looked at her. She gathered her courage and said, Big brother already has a girlfriend. Tang Yu remained calm. You're afraid that I'll take advantage of her? Tang Xin nodded vigorously, like a little wolf dog protecting its master. You're thinking too much. He used his authority as a brother. Clean up. Tang Xin looked at him. Was her brother not going to leave? She pursed her lips and began to negotiate. Let me stay, and let Big Brother help Chichi in. Tang Yu looked at her. I know you just want to take advantage of Chichi. You don't like Sun Feifei at all. Tang Xin shouted. Sometimes, one had to admire a child's intuition. She was always right. Chapter 345. Tang Xin wanted to scream, but she did not dare to. What? She was supposed to be spending New Year's with Chichi. Why was it her brother? Her brother already had a girlfriend. How could he be alone with Chichi in the same bedroom? Tang Xin thought about it. She was still worried, so she tiptoed to Pei Chichi's bedroom door. She opened the door slightly and took a peek. She was completely stunned. What was her brother doing? She saw her brother putting Chichi on the bed and kissing Chichi. Her brother already had a girlfriend, but he kissed Chichi. Tang Xin only dared to take a peek and did not dare to look anymore. She had a feeling that her brother would skin her alive if he found out that she was peeking at him. Tang Xinzi left and obediently went to clean up. In the bedroom, Tang Yu exhaled with difficulty and left Pei Chichi's little mouth. Perhaps it was because of the alcohol, her whole body was fragrant and soft. Tang Yu's gaze seemed to be on fire. Even though he had sex with her a few times last night, it was too long. How could one night make up for it? He pressed her hair with his palm and looked at her squinting eyes. Her slightly swollen lips were slightly parted, and the breath she exhaled was sweet. Especially when her petite body was moving up and down due to the difficulty of breathing, it was very, very seductive. Tang Yu could not help but lower his head and kiss her little mouth. He did not dare to kiss her forcefully but only lightly sipped on it. It was as if he was treating a precious treasure. She had drunk too much, but she was still somewhat sober. Who was he? Was he Tang Yu? Why did he kiss her? He already had Sun Feifei. Why did he treat her like this? What did he take her for? Her little hand struggled for a while, but she could not break free from his kiss. In the end, she was a little anxious and slapped his face. At that moment, the air seemed to have frozen. She turned her little face to the side and panted heavily. He seemed to have sobered up a little, but he immediately pressed both her hands down angrily and kissed her fiercely. Pei Chichi's eyes widened. Under her gaze, he kissed her on the lips. His 10 fingers intertwined as he struggled hopelessly, but he couldn't break free. His body felt heavy, and the thin material of his clothes couldn't block anything. She felt even more dizzy. She couldn't tell if this was real or fake. Or was it a dream? Tang Yu did not plan to take her. No matter how hungry he was, he had to consider Tang Xin's presence. He reluctantly left her lips. He felt that he was quite despicable to get her drunk just to kiss her. He propped himself up and caressed her red lips with his slender fingers. He stared at her rosy lips for a long time, caressed them, and couldn't help but kiss them lightly for a while. He raised his hand to look at his watch. About 10 minutes had passed. He rolled to the side and calmed himself down before tidying up his clothes and walking out. Tang Xin sat on the sofa and hugged her pillow. She saw her brother coming out of the room, dressed neatly. She thought of a word, a beast in human clothing. Tang Xin's long hair was loose and draped over her shoulders. She hugged a pillow and looked very fragile. Tang Yu coughed softly and walked over. Watching TV? Brother, are you not planning to leave? Tang Xin asked him carefully. Tang Yu casually sat down. With a sweep of his long arm, he pulled Tang Xin to his side. He hugged her with one arm and reached out to rub her face. He grunted softly. Tang Xin's eyes widened. She knew it. Chapter 346. Tang Yu changed the topic and pursed his lips. You and Chichi seemed to talk about everything. Tang Xin crawled over carefully and half knelt beside him. She placed her hand on his thigh and propped her chin up. I won't say anything that I shouldn't say. For example, you kissed Chichi. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at his sister threateningly. Tang Xin flinched. I promise I won't say anything, but brother. Tang Xin suddenly stopped talking. She stared at Tang Yu's neck. Her gaze turned strange. She touched it with her hand and bit her lip. No. You were bitten by a vixen. Chichi can't be with you. Tang Yu couldn't help but laugh. He caressed his neck and chuckled. Tang Xin, how did you know it was a vixen? It can't be Chichi. Tang Xin pouted and said unhappily. Tang Yu smiled but didn't say anything. Tang Xin looked up and was stunned. It can't be? Chichi bit me. Tang Yu patted the back of her hand. You said that you shouldn't say anything. Don't you remember? Tang Xin swallowed her saliva and nodded after a while. She remembered. Brother was too evil. She used to think that he was a beast, but now she felt that he was worse than a beast. If you say anything, I'll send you back now. The brother was bullying his sister. Tang Xin nodded with tears in her eyes. Boo-hoo, big brother is so bad. Tang Yu pressed Tang Xin's head into his arms. Let's watch TV. We'll sleep early after that. She didn't want to sleep early. She wanted to sleep with Chichi. But Tang Xin didn't dare to say it. She stared at her brother, the great demon king. At 9 o'clock, Tang Yu said on time, take your medicine and go to sleep. Tang Xin was touched. She grabbed his hand and whispered, Big brother, I don't have long to live, right? Nonsense. He patted her little head. It can be cured. Isn't it fine now? Tang Xin sniffled. I heard Mommy and Daddy arguing. Mommy said I wouldn't live past 20. Tang Yu frowned and felt another layer of anger towards Zhao Ku. How old was Tang Xin? She was already terrified of this illness, yet she was still talking about it. Tang Yu's heart softened a little. He reached out and patted his sister's head. Silly girl, as long as there's a suitable bone marrow, it can be cured. Tang Xin pouted and hugged her knees. She looked hurt. Brother, I've been waiting for so many years. Is it because I can't wait any longer? He smiled and pulled Tang Xin into his arms. Brother, can you kiss me? Tang Xin looked up at him. I might not even get a boyfriend in the future. Brother, give me a kiss. Just take it that I've had a boyfriend. Tang Xin clung onto him pitifully. Actually, Tang Yu was feeling a little down. He loved Tang Xin, but he didn't take much care of her. He couldn't bear to reject her wish. He kissed her forehead and said in a hoarse voice, Our Tang Xin will definitely get better. Tang Xin whimpered and lay on his lap, not saying a word. Her brother had never doted on her like this before. At this moment, she felt very happy. Tang Xin pressed her face against Tang Yu's and hugged him. Brother, we'll always be together with Chichi, okay? She didn't hear what Tang Yu said. Chapter 347. Tang Xin was sleepy. Tang Yu did not have the heart to wake her up, so he tiptoed to the guest room and found her backpack. He took out the medicine, poured some water and fed it to Tang Xin. Tang Xin groggily called out to her brother. "I'm here." He smiled warmly and carried her to the guest room. He placed Tang Xin on the bed and helped her remove her jacket and trousers. Tang Yu did all of this as if he was taking care of a child. He even softened his heart. He wondered if his and Chichi's children would be like Tang Xin. Chichi was not a boring person. It was just that the environment she grew up in was a little twisted, so she was cold to outsiders. He covered Tang Xin with the blanket and sat for a while before getting up. Before he left, he heard Tang Xin moaning in her sleep. "Chichi, I don't want to go back." Tang Yu laughed in his heart. He did not know why Tang Xin liked Chichi so much. He turned around, wanting to comfort Tang Xin, but when he turned around, he was a little stunned. Tang Xin was drooling. "She's so old, and she's still drooling?" Tang Yu shook his head and took a tissue to wipe it off for her. Then, he closed the door for her and walked out. When he reached the living room, there were people sleeping on both sides. The two little ones. He held his forehead and laughed self-deprecatingly. It was obvious that he didn't want them to spend the new year alone, so he left his mother behind. Now, one was asleep and the other was drunk. He was the only one left. He stood there for a while and looked at the television. Even if he was alone, his heart was filled with satisfaction. At midnight, he turned off the television and walked into Pei Chichi's bedroom. He removed the sweater and pants, leaving only a pair of black boots. He lifted the blanket and lay down beside her. Pei Chichi was originally curled up, but when she felt his warmth, she automatically curled up and buried her whole body in his arms, her little face resting on his shoulder. Tang Yu looked down at her in the dim light. Her long hair was like ink on the pillow and wrapped around his body. Her little face was slightly red from drinking too much, and her body was warm. His fingers slowly fell on her back, and there was an unquestionable gentleness in his eyes. "Pei Chichi, you still dare to say that you don't love me?" He held her in his arms and closed his eyes. This was the first time he slept with her without any desire. Late at night, the fireworks were still going off outside. Tang Yu opened his dark eyes and said softly, "Chichi, Happy New Year. And, little fool, you can't escape." When Pei Chichi woke up, she felt that her waist was a little sore, and the sunlight was dazzling. She forced her eyes open and was stunned. In front of him was Tang Yu. It was a naked Tang Yu. Even if he was wearing a pair of underpants, it couldn't hide anything. And at this moment, she was nestled in his arms, her little mouth was facing his shoulder, and more importantly, there was her saliva on it. Pei Chichi's eyes widened. She wanted to move away, but the moment she moved, her body became empty, and she fell straight off the bed. A big hand caught her, and then she fell into his arms. He groaned, probably because of the pain. Pei Chichi buried her face in his chest and whispered, "Why are you on my bed?" Chapter 348. Pei Chichi did not dare to move. She only whispered to him. Tang Yu's fingers pressed down, but in the end, he let go of her. He leaned against the headboard and looked at her. "You and Tang Xin are sleeping in one room each. Miss Pei, do you want me to sleep with Tang Xin and my sister?" His tone was very calm. It did not seem like he had woken up early in the morning. Pei Chichi's voice was a little weak. "No. And don't worry, I won't do anything to you. After all." He did not finish his sentence and was interrupted by him. Pei Chichi said angrily, "I know. You have a girlfriend." He was obviously stunned for a moment. Then, there was a subtle smile in his eyes. "That's right." As he said that, there was really no need to lie together anymore. He got up and put on a pair of trousers and a sweater. However, a box of things fell on the ground. He bent down to pick it up. He had bought it at the supermarket today. Pei Chichi saw it too. Her face was a little pale. She pursed her lips and did not say a word. Tang Yu looked at her and put the small box into his pocket. He did not explain anything. Indeed, There was no need to explain anything to her. He turned around. "I'll come again tonight." Pei Chichi was stunned. Her voice was a little shaky. "What do you mean?" Tang Yu was very calm. "I'm worried about Tang Xin here. If you're worried, you can bring Tang Xin back." She probably said that out of spite. He had done that with Sun Feifei, and now he was sleeping at her place with condoms for another woman in his pocket. What was going on? There was a trace of a smile in Tang Yu's eyes again. Before he could say anything, Tang Xin stood at the door with a little rabbit in her arms. She looked at Pei Chichi. "Chichi, you don't like me, do you? Is that why you want to chase me away?" Pei Chichi's lips moved, but she could not say anything. Tang Yu chuckled and walked into the bathroom. He said briskly, "You better explain to Tang Xin." Pei Chichi looked at the tearful Tang Xin and the cold face of Tang Yu. She had a feeling in her heart. She should be the one leaving. Let the siblings dominate this place. When she turned around, Tang Xin was still looking at her. Suddenly, Pei Chichi felt a headache. Chichi. It was that incredibly soft meow of a kitten again. When Tang Yu came out of the bathroom, he saw that Pei Chichi was still being pestered by Tang Xin. His mood suddenly became better. Under the morning light, he looked extraordinarily handsome. He bent down and picked Tang Xin up. "All right, stop fooling around." Tang Xin was in Tang Yu's arms. She leaned on Tang Yu's shoulder and made a face at Pei Chichi. She looked like a villain who was intoxicated by success. Pei Chichi suddenly felt a little envious. But she could only hide it in her heart. Pei Chichi sat there. This was her home, but she suddenly felt that she was the outsider. The faint smile on her face froze. Finally, she shook her head. Tang Yu took Tang Xin out for breakfast. He did not ask Pei Chichi, so she naturally did not follow. But he did not take Tang Xin's luggage with him. She was surprised and suspicious. She wanted to ask, but she was afraid that Tang Xin would stick to him again. So she was restless the whole morning. At around 10 o'clock, Tang Yu brought Tang Xin back. Chapter 349. After dinner, Tang Xin lay on the sofa and watched TV with great interest. Tang Yu walked to the balcony to smoke. He was wearing a pair of black trousers and the same sweater. His short haircut made his facial features look even more defined. He leaned against the balcony and smoked 2 or 3 cigarettes at a moderate pace. His elegant appearance made her house seem a little cramped, but he seemed to be at ease. Was he and Tang Xin planning to spend the entire New Year's here? Pei Chichi stood in the living room and bit her lower lip. She thought for a moment and walked to the balcony. Tang Xin suddenly said, "Chichi, if I were you, I wouldn't walk into the tiger's mouth like a wolf." The little girl stared at the TV and said in an old-fashioned tone, "My brother looks like a hungry wolf. He's not picky at all." Pei Chichi thought she heard wrong. Tang Xin was so young, but she knew the words hungry wolf. "I'll deal with you later," Pei Chichi warned. Tang Xin giggled. Her mouth was stuffed with slices, and she ate like a little mouse. However, she would be stuffing herself with dog food later. Chichi didn't have time to deal with her. Her brother would definitely deal with Chichi first. Tang Xin felt that she was being unkind. Pei Chichi glared at her again. She opened the balcony door, closed it, and drew the curtains. Tang Xin whimpered. "Silly Chichi." Tang Yu was still smoking as he leaned against the wall. Behind him was the bustling night view, and countless fireworks bloomed above and behind him. But none of this could match up to his nobility, nor did it taint him with the slightest bit of the secular world. His dark eyes watched as Pei Chichi pushed the door open and walked in. He flicked the cigarette and looked at her. "What's the matter?" Pei Chichi stopped 3 steps away from him and looked up at him. The lights on the balcony were off and his back was to the outside, so she couldn't see his expression clearly. She just felt that he was unfathomable. "When are you bringing Tang Xin home?" She looked up as she spoke. The fireworks outside were all imprinted in her eyes, like countless little stars blooming, dazzling her eyes. Tang Yu just looked at her and didn't say anything for a long time. Pei Chichi was a little uneasy. She pursed her lips and looked at him. He finally spoke. His voice was abnormally hoarse. She's annoying. I'm annoyed by you. Pei Chichi didn't say anything. It's not convenient for her to stay at my mother's place, so she can only stay here for a few days, he said lightly, as if it were a matter of course. Can't you stay there? She said without thinking. Tang Yu stared at her for a long time before slowly saying, Pei Chichi, Sun Feifei is different from you. She won't be happy if Tang Xin stays with me. Tang Xin, Pei Chichi said nothing. Xin. Of her of Tang of. Yes, she'll be unhappy. She looked up at him again. She'll be even more unhappy if you stay at my place. Tang Yu didn't answer. He took out another cigarette and took a puff. What about you, Pei Chichi? If I bring Tang Xin home and let Sun Feifei stay there too, will you be unhappy? He took out the 01 box from his pocket and put it on the balcony. He smiled. Will you? Pei Chichi couldn't help but stare at the box. She felt like she was suffocating. She couldn't answer him. Chapter 350. But it was obvious that he didn't want to let her off. His voice became sterner as he said, Pei Chichi, will you? She was startled, and her heart began to beat wildly again. Tang Yu took a step forward and came to her side. The tips of his shoes were almost touching hers. His long fingers pinched her beautiful chin and lifted it slightly. She looked at him and immediately lowered her eyes, wanting to retreat. But he didn't allow it. He pinched her chin forcefully and forced her to lift her head. Pei Chichi, do you want me to do that to her? She was stunned for a moment. Her mouth was slightly agape as she looked at him hopelessly. She knew what he was talking about and knew that it was dangerous now, but she just couldn't move her eyes away. His hot breath enveloped her body. She couldn't move at all and could only watch him lower his head. His thin lips hovered above her lips. His straight nose touched hers gently and his dark eyes looked into her eyes. He was so close to her that her legs went weak. Pei Chichi's little hand grabbed onto the wall beside her. Her fingers turned white. His lips gradually lowered. He only touched her lightly and stopped after a light taste. Then, his deep voice rang out and he pressed his lips against hers. Do you want me to do that to her? Her little hand gripped the wall even tighter and her body leaned backwards, trying to escape from the pressure he brought. But he also lowered himself so that it looked like she was sending herself to him. Just as she was about to fall, his large palm supported her waist. His lips curled into a mocking smile. Pei Chichi, do you know that your eyelashes tremble when you lie? She bit her lip. She really wanted to find a mirror to look at. But now she didn't dare to move, for fear that he would do something to her again. His fingers gently caressed her red lips. In the dark night, that redness was a little seductive. His long fingers caressed her lips gently. His face was close to her ear and he said in a low voice, do you want me to do that to her too? Even, do what I do with you? Her body was extremely stiff. His voice was very seductive, especially in this cold and quiet night. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and bit his finger. He did not take his hand back. He looked at her intently, and she saw a small flame ignite in his eyes. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Tang Yu couldn't wait to kill her. He let out a long sigh and withdrew his hand. Before she could react, he pressed her against the wall and sealed her mouth with his thin lips. Pei Chichi's eyes widened. Her palms were pressed flat against the tiles behind her. It was cold, but it couldn't extinguish her burning body. His kiss was a little brutal, as if he was punishing her, but at the same time, it seemed like he was using all of his strength. Her lips were hurting from the friction. She struggled a little, but he pressed her palm down and slowly moved it to the top of her head. He pinned her firmly to the wall and used one of his hands to pinch her chin. With a slight force, she unconsciously opened her mouth slightly. He took advantage of the situation and entered her, entangling her. This kiss was getting deeper and hotter. It seemed like he didn't intend to restrain himself and let the kiss bring up his entire body's desire. Pei Chichi could only submit. She lifted her little face and was kissed by him over and over again. Her legs felt weak and her body felt a little embarrassed. She had known about love for a long time. She knew that it was desire. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.